As the sun rose over the lush green fields of Wanyendo, the villagers went about their daily tasks, tending to their crops and caring for their families. But their peaceful existence was soon interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. A runner burst into the village, panting and out of breath. "Men with guns and knives are coming," he shouted. These men were led by a white officer by the name of Oscar Mikax. Panic and fear swept through the village as the people scrambled to gather their belongings and flee. But Nyendo, the wise and respected chief of Wanyendo, knew that they couldn't outrun the soldiers. He called for a council of elders to come up with a plan. After much discussion, Nyendo decided to try and placate the soldiers by offering them food and gifts. He hoped that by showing hospitality, the soldiers would be satisfied and pass through the village without causing harm. But as Nyendo suspected, the soldiers were unsatisfied with the food and gifts. They camped outside the village, and the following day, they stormed into Wanyendo, dragging the villagers out of their homes and beating them mercilessly. Men and women were separated and tied together with cords around their necks like animals being led to slaughter. One man, Oleka, refused to move any further and was beaten until he lay lifeless on the ground. Many more met the same fate. The women watched in horror as their babies were taken away from them and left to die. After marching for 10 days, they brought the natives to the Lower Laba River, placed them in canoes and transported them to the white man's town at Yangwe. Once there, they were forced to work as slaves for the rest of their lives. The Congo Free State was a dark and tragic period in history marked by exploitation, conquest, and one of the worst mass killings of recent times. At the heart of it all was King Leopold Louis Philippe Maria Victor, popularly known as King Leopold II, the King of the Belgians, a ruthless and cunning ruler who claimed the massive territory in Central Africa as his own personal colony. Despite his reputation as a philanthropic monarch throughout Europe, Leopold's true motives were driven by greed and a complete lack of empathy for the suffering of the Congolese people. He never even set foot in the land he oppressed for more than 2 decades, remaining aloof and detached like a bomber pilot high above the clouds, oblivious to the destruction he wreaked below. This is a story of exploration, exploitation, and of conquest. It is a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of greed. In the early 1870s, sub-Saharan Africa was a logical place for an aspiring colonialist to look. The British and the Boers controlled South Africa, and the weakened Portugal claimed most of what used to be the Kingdom of the Congo, as well as Mozambique on the east coast. Along Africa's Great Western Bulge, Portugal, Spain, Britain, and France owned a few islands and territories. Otherwise, about 80% of the entire land area of Africa was still under indigenous rulers. As the 19th century progressed, the European powers began to justify colonialism in various ways, claiming that it would Christianize the heathen, civilize the savage races, or bring about the miraculous benefits of free trade. But in Africa, a new rationalization had emerged, suppressing the Arab slave trade. In the slave markets of Zanzibar, traders sold their human loot from deep within Central Africa to Arab plantation owners on the island and other buyers in the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. For Europeans, this was an ideal target of disapproval as they saw one uncivilized race enslaving another. Enter King Leopold II. Upon the death of his father, Leopold had inherited the distinctive title of King of the Belgians, and Belgium itself was barely older than its young monarch. After spells of Spanish, Austrian, French, and Dutch rule, it had only become independent in 1830 following a revolt against the Netherlands. As a ruler of a nation with a history of foreign rule, Leopold was keenly aware of the benefits of colonialism and was not shy about expressing his love for acquiring colonies. He saw how profitable it was for the British and the Dutch and was determined to do the same for Belgium. In 1875, he tried to buy the Philippines from Spain, but they refused to sell. After failing to purchase colonies in Asia or in the Americas, Leopold set his sights firmly on Africa.
For the moment, neither the Spanish nor the Portuguese nor the Dutch is inclined to sell. I intend to find out discreetly if there is anything to be done in Africa.
In Africa, Leopold saw an opportunity to present himself as a savior, offering to put an end to the Arab slave trade if the European powers would grant him the rights to the vast lands of the Congo. But at the time, not much of the Congo was known to Europeans. In the early 1840s, the British explorer and physician David Livingstone wandered across Central and South Africa for nearly 3 decades. He was followed by a Scottish explorer by the name of Vernie Lovelet Cameron, who became the first European to cross Africa from east to west. When Cameron was reported to be running out of funds in 1875, King Leopold quickly contributed 100,000 francs, securing his place as a patron of African exploration. A few years later, American explorer Henry Morton Stanley was sent to find Livingstone, who had lost contact with the outside world for nearly 6 years and was now ill. The two met in the town of Ujiji on the shores of Lake Tanganyika in November 1871. Now famous for this, Stanley went on to chart the course of the Congo River, becoming the first European to do so and solve the mystery of where it came from. News of Stanley's expedition reached Leopold, who saw the vast unclaimed territory in the heart of Africa as a potential colony. He invited Stanley to work for him and explore the region for 5 years, but Stanley had other plans and hoped to claim the land for the British. But when the Brits showed no interest, Stanley accepted Leopold's offer. Leopold was most interested in the Congo's abundant ivory, which was a rare and expensive material at the time. During his trip, Stanley discovered that the Congolese people were no military threat, as there was no single all-powerful state along the crucial transportation artery of the Congo River that would need to be subdued. With the potential opposition so fragmented, Leopold believed that the conquest of the Congo would be relatively easy. To distract the major European powers, he gave his African operation the political cover of the International Association of the Congo. However, other European nations such as France also had their sights set on the region. French explorer and naval officer Pierre Savagnin de Brazza signed a treaty with the local chief, ceding a strip of the northern shoreline of the Congo to France. This area would later be known as Congo-Brazzaville. Consequently, Leopold tried to recruit the Brazza, but all of his attempts were unsuccessful.
If there was an advantage to be gained from the Congo, I would prefer that it was the French flag, not the Belgian international flag, that floated over this splendid African territory.
The arrival of the Brazza sparked the interest of the Portuguese, who had previously maintained trade relations with the people living around the mouth of the Congo River. To reassert their claim to the land, the Portuguese began to compete with Leopold and France for control of the region. Facing competition from both Portugal and France, the king knew that he had to act fast, and he pressured Stanley to lead his men deeper into the African interior. Stanley had now assembled a formidable army armed with advanced rifles, cannons, and machine guns. He led his men through the dense jungle, negotiating treaties with local chiefs. In the end, he had secured agreements with over 450 chiefs in the Congo Basin, many of which granted Leopold a monopoly on trade and complete control over their lands. Unfortunately, these chiefs had little understanding of what they were signing, as they had never seen these written words before. As a result, they often ceded their rights to Leopold for very little in return. By the time Stanley and his men returned to Europe, the blue flag with a gold star could be seen fluttering above the villages and territories throughout the region. As the 19th century drew to a close, the European powers were hungry for more African territory. The German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, wanted colonies on the continent, and the British, already with a substantial presence in Africa, were starting to worry about competition. Leopold saw an opportunity to stake his claim at the Congo. He knew that the larger powers would likely be hesitant to recognize the one-man colony that Stalin had established for him, so he decided to seek diplomatic recognition from the United States. To his surprise, he was successful. He also managed to convince the French to accept his claims in the Congo by offering to sell the land to them rather than the British if he ever ran out of money. As conflicting claims emerged during the scramble for Africa, it became clear that some ground rules were needed to divide the continent. Bismarck offered to host a diplomatic conference in Berlin to address these issues. On November 15, 1884, Bismarck gathered representatives from the European powers for the Berlin Conference. Not a single African was invited to attend. While the conference did not directly partition Africa, it resolved some conflicting claims and established some ground rules for the further division of the continent. As a result, Leopold was able to secure the land near the mouth of the Congo River for himself, as well as the seaport of Matadi on the lower stretch of the river, which would enable him to transport goods to and from the interior. Although the entity recognized by the Berlin Conference was the International Association of the Congo, Leopold decided to rename it. He called it État indépendant du Congo, or the Congo Free State. Back at home, most Belgians were shocked to discover that his new colony was larger than England, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy combined, comprising 1/13 of the African continent and more than 76 times the size of Belgium. At last, at the age of 50, Leopold had the colony of his dreams, and he immediately set to work building his empire. In the late 1880s, King Leopold introduced a dominion system in the Congo, declaring that all vacant land belonged to the state. He also sought to dominate the ivory trade in the region, forbidding the native Congolese to sell or deliver ivory to anyone other than his agents. To enforce his control over the vast territory, Leopold established the Force Publique, a military comprised of mercenaries from all over Africa. Over the next decade, the Force Publique grew to include more than 19,000 officers and men, becoming the most powerful army in Central Africa. However, their methods were often brutal and they committed numerous atrocities in the Congo. Leopold's army soon had its hands full as they were confronted with major rebellions from more than a dozen ethnic groups in the Congo. This included the Yaka people, who fought the Force Publique for over 10 years before being subdued, and the Chokwe people, who fought for nearly 20 years and inflicted heavy casualties on Leopold's soldiers before being defeated. Also, an alliance of the Boer and the Bodja tribes, who mobilized more than 5,000 men for a guerrilla war, was also defeated. In the far south region of Katanga, the Sagan people, led by a powerful chief by the name of Mulume Neama, put up a fierce resistance against Leopold's troops. However, when the rebels took refuge in a cave, the Force Publique commander ordered his men to smoke them out by lighting fires at the cave entrances. After 3 months, the troops from the Force Publique finally entered the cave. They found 178 bodies, which they subsequently obliterated to erase any trace of the rebels. The Force Publique was made up of white, mostly Belgian commissioned officers, as well as black soldiers who carried out the dirty work. The black soldiers were initially mercenaries from Zanzibar and British West African colonies, but they were soon outnumbered by soldiers from the Congo itself. Slavery also played a role in the recruitment, with white state agents receiving bonuses for the number of men they delivered to the Force Publique. The black soldiers of the Force Publique were poorly paid, fed, and often flogged with whips for the slightest offenses. As a result, many attempted to desert and mutinies were very common. One major mutiny occurred at the military base in Louw-Lorbourg in 1895. The base commander, Matteo Pezza, was a notorious bully who used his fist on those under him. he routinely ordered disobedient soldiers to be given 125 lashes with a chicote. On one fateful day, Peza ordered the soldier to be flogged, but before the man wielding the chicote could begin, a sergeant by the name of Candolo went up to him and snatched the whip out of his hands. Shortly afterward, rebellion against Peza broke out. A soldier attacked the wounded commander, who fled into the bush and hid, but these rebels tracked him down and killed him. They then set off for other first public posts, gathering supporters among the black soldiers and killing many European officers in the process. The rebels took control of the Kasai region and successfully fought off attempts by the First Republic to reclaim it. The uprising lasted for 13 years until Candolo and his men were eventually eliminated in 1908. In addition to facing resistance from the native Congolese, King Leopold also had to deal with the Arab slavers from the east. The most powerful of these was Ahmed bin Mohammed El Mujebi, popularly known as Tipu Tip. Tipu Tip had made a fortune in both ivory and slaves, and his growing power and administrative acumen had made him the de facto ruler of Eastern Congo. Leopold's dealings with Tipu Tip, who was a notorious slave dealer, sparked criticism and outrage in Europe. To protect his reputation and assert control over the ivory trade in the Eastern Congo, the king instigated a proxy war known as the Congo-Arab War, which lasted for 2 years. In the end, Leopold was able to drive the Arabs out of the region. The early 1890s marked a pivotal movement in history as the Industrial War developed an insatiable hunger for rubber. Factories across the globe were desperate to get their hands on this valuable commodity, and nowhere was the demand for rubber felt more intensely than in the equatorial rainforest of Leopold's Congo. White rubber quickly overtook ivory as the main source of revenue for the Congo Free State, making it the most profitable colony in Africa. The profits came easily as the process of harvesting white rubber required no cultivation or capital investment, only labor. However, finding the labor to meet the demand for rubber proved to be a challenge for the leaders of the Congo. Their solution was forced labor.
Since the natives don't like making rubber, they must be compelled to do so.
Troops from the First Republic would march into villages and attack the natives until they were able to seize their women. These women would be held hostage until the required amount of rubber were brought in. If the main villagers resisted the order to gather rubber, they faced death, and those who failed to bring in enough rubber were flogged with a chicote, a whip made of strips from the hippopotamus hide. Apart from the hostage-taking, the severing of hands was also a deliberate policy designed to coerce the native population into compliance with the rubber regime. Occasionally, there were some European officers who mistrusted their black soldiers. For each cartridge issued to their soldiers, they demanded proof that the bullet had been used to kill someone. The standard proof was the right hand from a corpse, but often when the soldiers missed or failed to kill their victims, they cut off the hands of the living men. As the darkness of the Congo began to slowly unfold, it became clear that something truly horrific was happening within its borders. Few outsiders could witness the atrocities firsthand, as access to the country was tightly controlled, and those who did manage to visit were subject to immense pressure to keep quiet. Employees of the Free State were forced to sign strict non-disclosure agreements as a condition of their employment. These agreements made it nearly impossible for them to speak out about the horrors they were witnessing. But as news of the atrocities slowly trickled out, it became increasingly difficult for the Free State to keep a lead on the horrors taking place within the Congo's borders. In 1890, a black American Baptist missionary by the name of George Washington Williams undertook a tour of the Congo in hopes of finding another Liberia suitable for American immigration. He spent 6 months in the Congo, but the horrors he witnessed in the region appalled him. Before returning to the United States, he knew that he had to do something to shed light on the atrocities taking place in the Congo. In an open letter to Leopold, Williams accused the Free State authorities for conniving in slavery, expropriation, and crimes against humanity. His letter would be distributed widely in Europe and the United States. But Leopold was not about to go down without a fight. He used the power of the press to discredit Williams, and unfortunately for Williams, his efforts would be cut short as he died of tuberculosis the following year. Despite Leopold's efforts to silence him, Williams's letter was widely distributed and marked the first comprehensive indictment of Leopold's colonial regime. Another black American by the name of William Shepard witnessed firsthand the atrocities being inflicted upon the Kuba people deep in the Congo rainforest. In the same year that George Washington Williams visited the Congo, a young sea captain by the name of Joseph Conrad would embark on a journey to the Congo's interior. This would change the course of his life forever. Conrad had always dreamed of exploring the exotic beauty of Africa, but what he found in the Congo was a far cry from the paradise he imagined. Instead, he witnessed firsthand what he would call
the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience.
Deeply affected by his experience, he would turn it into writing with Art of Darkness, a book regarded as one of the most powerful and enduring works of literature, and that which cemented his reputation as one of the greatest writers in the English language. Leopold tried to counter the growing criticism by publicly declaring himself deeply shocked at the reports of the misdeeds in his domain. But in 1895, he faced his first real crisis in Europe when one of his officers by the name of Captain Hubert Luthier killed an Englishman. Charles Stokes was a British trader with a reputation for being flamboyant and unpredictable. He worked for the German government and owned an ivory trading business that competed with the lucrative monopoly that Leopold was trying to establish in the Eastern Congo. He was accused by the Free State authorities of selling arms to the Afro-Arabs, a charge that will have serious consequences for him. Luthier ordered the first public expedition led by Lieutenant Josue Henry to track down Stokes near the state's eastern border. They found him. On the 14th of January 1895, Charles Stokes was charged with selling guns, gunpowder, and detonators to the Arab slavers. Despite his protests that the arms in his possession were solely for the use of his entourage, he was sentenced to death under military law and hanged the next day. The execution of Stokes outraged the British and the German governments, and the Free State authorities were eventually forced to concede that the execution had been illegal. The European press began to pay more attention to the atrocities taking place in the Congo, and Leopold was forced to take action. In 1896, he appointed the Commission for the Protection of the Natives, consisting of 6 prominent Congo missionaries. However, none of the members of the commission were based in any of the prime robber areas where the atrocities were taking place. And once again, Leopold was able to deflect much of the attention away from the Congo. In 1897, the world's attention was focused on the Belgian capital of Brussels, where a world fair was taking place. Amongst the many exhibits on display, there was one which stunned visitors from all over the world. Located on the outskirts of the city at Tervuren, this exhibit was unlike any other. King Leopold had imported 267 black men, women, and children from the Congo and deployed them in a human zoo where visitors could stare at them as if they were animals in a cage. Fascinated by what they saw, some of these visitors offered candy to the Africans without realizing the harm they were causing. When the king was informed that some of the Africans were suffering from indigestion due to the candy they had eaten, he ordered an equivalent of a zoo's "Do Not Feed the Animals" sign to be posted. The placard read,
"The blacks are fed by the organizing committee.
Several Congolese died of pneumonia and influenza at the exhibit and were buried, interviewing. Their lives and dignity treated as nothing more than a spectacle for the enjoyment of others. By the end of the 19th century, Leopold's most formidable enemy would surface in Europe. Georges Edmond Pierre Achille Morel de Ville was a trusted employee of a shipping line in Liverpool called Edda Dempster. It had a monopoly on all transport of cargo to and from the Congo Free State. Because Morel speaks fluent French, his company sends him to Belgium every few weeks to supervise the loading and unloading of ships on the Congo Run. It was during one of these trips that he began to notice something disturbing. At the docks in Antwerp, he saw his company's ships arriving filled with valuable cargoes of rubber and ivory, but when they set off for the Congo, what they carried were mostly armed officers, firearms, and ammunition. There seemed to be little or nothing being exchanged for the rubber and ivory. Morel realized that the only possible explanation for this was slave labor. Determined to expose the truth about what was happening in the Congo, Morel quit his job and became one of the greatest investigative journalists of his time. From 1901 to 1913, working sometimes 14 to 16 hours a day, he devoted his formidable energy and skill to putting the story of forced labor in King Leopold's Congo on the world's front pages. With funding from some of his supporters and friends, he started a publication called The West African Mail, where he wrote articles exposing corruption and abuses taking place in the Congo. But despite his effort, it was difficult to get the British government to put pressure on a friendly monarch like Leopold. However, with the help of his allies in the parliament, Morel was able to convince the Foreign Office to send a telegram to the British consul in Congo ordering him to go to the interior and report what he witnessed. The consul who received this telegram was an Irishman by the name of Roger Casement. He spent more than 3.5 months in the interior investigating the rubber-producing areas in the Congo. His findings would later be critical in bringing an end to the atrocities taking place in the Congo Free State. As the campaign against Leopold's rule gained momentum, the regime began to target Morel's allies in the Congo. One of them was Ezekiah Andrew Shanu. Shanu was a school teacher from Nigeria who had originally worked for Leopold's regime, recruiting soldiers from his homeland for the First Republic. But as the years proceeded, something caused a change in his heart and moved him into the camp of Leopold's enemies. He began to secretly supply information to Roger Casement to expose the atrocities taking place in the Congo. You see, after the protests against Leopold's rule, the Congo Free State occasionally prosecuted low-ranking officials for atrocities against Africans, but these trials were kept secret and the transcripts were rarely made public. Morel knew that the evidence from this trial could be a valuable asset to fight against Leopold, and he asked Shanu to try and uncover what he could. Tragically, Shanu's efforts to help Morel and the reform campaign ended in a disaster when a Congo state official he was working with turned on him, exposing him as Morel's accomplice. Because Shanu was a British subject, the Congo authorities did not want to risk an international incident by arresting him. Instead, they harassed him unremittingly, resented the medal he had been awarded for his work for the state, and ordered all state employees not to patronize his businesses. The harassment and intimidation from the Congo became too much for Shanu to bear, and in July 1905, he took his own life. As Morel and Casement caught Europe's attention with reports of the Holocaust in the Congo, newspapers and magazines ran pictures of burned villages and mutilated bodies. Looking at the written and photographic records immediately raises a crucial question. What was the death toll in Leopold's Congo? King Leopold's Congo officially existed for 23 years beginning in 1885, but the rubber boom, the cause of the war's bloodletting, began in the mid-1890s and continued several years after the end of his regime. Although the killings in the Congo were of genocidal proportions, it was not strictly speaking a genocide, as the Congo Free State was not deliberately trying to eliminate one particular ethnic group from the face of the earth. The official death toll is difficult to determine, as it likely includes deaths from murder, starvation, disease, and a plummeting birth rate. However, a Belgian government commission in 1919 estimated that the population of the Congo had been reduced by half since the time that Henri Morton Stanley began laying his foundation. Later counts in 1924 put the population of the Congo at 10 million, which would suggest that the population dropped by approximately 10 million people during Leopold's rule. Determined to bring an end to the suffering of the Congo, Morel traveled to the United States, the first country to have recognized the Congo. He founded the American Congo Reform Association, which sought to expose the truth about the horrors of the Congo Free State and to advocate for change. Morel believed that the best solution for the people of the Congo would be for the country to become a Belgian colony open to scrutiny and the rule of law. Finally, in 1908, after much opposition and criticism within Belgium and the international community, King Leopold was finally forced to cede the Congo Free State to Belgium. The country was transformed into a Belgian colony, and Leopold's rule of 23 years came to an end. However, the Belgian king did not go quietly into the night. To conceal evidence of wrongdoing during his regime, he ordered the entire archive of the Congo Free State to be burnt.
Even though the Congo had been taken away from me, they have no right to know what I did there.
King Leopold lived for another year after ceding the Congo, but in December 1909, at the age of 74, he fell gravely ill and died of an intestinal blockage. His death was met with little sorrow, as he was widely remembered for the atrocities he had committed in the Congo. Since he never had a male heir, he was succeeded by his nephew, King Albert I. Leopold's reign of 44 years remains the longest in Belgian history, and his legacy is still the subject of much debate and controversy today. Some scholars and historians have estimated that he drew as much as 220 million francs in profit from the Congo, which is over $1.1 billion in today's dollars. After the Belgian takeover of 1908, abuses against the white rubber gatherers in the Congo decreased, and there was far less news of villages being burnt or of women and children being held hostage. However, this change was not necessarily due to a kinder and gentler regime, but rather to other factors such as the decline of the rubber market. In the process of forgetting the killings of Leopold's Congo, Belgium received an unexpected reminder as it too became a victim rather than a conqueror. In August 1914, during the First World War, Germany invaded Belgium and killed more than 5,000 Belgian civilians. In a striking but unconscious echo of the images from the Congo Reform movement, the press in the Allied countries reported that the German soldiers were cutting off the hands and feet of Belgian children. Looking back at the humanitarian efforts of Eddy Morel, the courage of witnesses like George Washington Williams, William Shepard, and Roger Casement in particular, whose exposure to the Congo made him realize that his own country of Ireland was also an exploited colony. He would later be hanged by the British for this. Lest we forget the bravery of Androshanu and natives like Mulome Nyama and Kandolo. All this would make for a fitting climax to our story, but the echoes of Leopold's ghost will linger on, resounding through the Congo long after he was gone. Thanks for watching to the end. If you love our work, kindly support us on Patreon or become a channel member. Links are in the description below. I love you all, and until I see you in the next video, goodbye.